My name is Eduardo Mansur. I'm the director of the Land and Water Division in FAO, within the Department of Climate, Biodiversity, Land and Water. And we are here today to have a session within the Agriculture Action Day of the Global Action Agenda of this COP on unlocking the potential of soil organic carbon for climate change action. The event will showcase how soil organic carbon and sustainable soil management can contribute to climate change adaptation and mitigation, with a focus on small island development states. We intend to explore strategies to upscale recommended practices, including through potential financing mechanisms. I would like to start by recognizing the presence of His Excellency Minister Inia Seruiratu. Sir, if you would come to the podium to welcome the participants of this event and bring a perspective of this event within the Green Climate Agenda. Minister Seriato is Minister for Agriculture, Rural and Maritime Development and National Disasters Management of the Government of the Republic of Fiji. We are very honored to welcome you, sir. As you know, Fiji is has the presidency of this COP, and this is what we call the SEEDS COP, the COP of the small island development states. Why that? Because we are discussing on fragile ecosystems, and we would like to listen from Minister Seruiratu, who's the champion on climate and leader of this Global Climate Action Initiative under the Secretariat, how soils and sustainable soil management could respond to the issues that we are discussing here today. Without further ado, Minister, I would like to pass you the floor. You can speak from there or from here, wherever you feel more comfortable.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and Excellencies, good day, guten Tag, and Bulavinaka. I'm indeed honored and privileged to be here with you this afternoon for this very, very important event as part of the thematic day for agriculture. Excellencies, you will all agree with me that agriculture is so important. The 7.5 billion people on planet Earth needs to be fed, and most importantly, there is indication that the global population will again increase in the years to come, and therefore the challenge that we face is about providing food, and it's not only about food security, but most importantly nutrition security as well. I come from a small island, Pacific island country, very vulnerable to the effects of climate change. I have been asked a few questions about climate change here in Bonn, and I am telling the audience that you don't have to ask me about climate change, because I am already experiencing climate change in the islands. It threatens us in so many ways, and for agriculture specifically, I'll talk on a few issues. One, it's the devastating effect of what we call climate-induced disasters. In 2016, February 2016, we had Cyclone Winston, a Category 5 cyclone. Prior to that, in 2015, in the South Pacific region, we had Cyclone Pam, which devastated Vanuatu and other small island countries within the Pacific. For Fiji alone, in 2010, we had a Category 4 cyclone, Cyclone Thomas. In 2012, another Category 4 cyclone, Cyclone Evans. And then in 2016, Category 5, Cyclone Winston. This is the new norm for us. The way we live is changing. And therefore, the way we do development must also change. And the way we do cooperation must also change. this is all important for all of us. I am saying that climate change has affected us, small island, vulnerable countries, in so many ways. Cyclone Winston, the damage to the agriculture sector alone was more than $250 million US. And for a small, narrow-based economy like Fiji, this is huge as a percentage of our GDP. And when it comes to recovery, it's a lot of effort. It takes a lot of effort and resources to recover from cyclones, from the devastating effects of climate-induced disasters. It affects the livelihood of our people. And not only that, social implications as well. People don't want to go back to their respective communities. So there it leads to internal migration and so many other things that come with it. Changing weather pattern. As we speak, in some parts of Fiji, prolonged dry spell for months. Livestock is dying. Crops are dying. Farmers are affected. This is what climate change brings, particularly to us, the small island countries. Saltwater intrusion. It also affects us, particularly because most of our coastal communities, they rely on agriculture for their livelihood. About 45% of rural Fijians depend on agriculture as their livelihood. And it's the same in other small island countries. We are here on a very important topic on organic soils. Of course, we all understand that we need to produce, but we need to produce at a minimal cost. And of course, we have to produce not at the expense of the environment. Of course, there are negative impacts of agriculture, but agriculture also, on a positive note, can also contribute to reducing global warming. And this is why we are here, Excellencies for the Solutions. And for smallholder subsistence farmers, particularly in the small vulnerable islands that I have talked about, these are options for them so that they can still produce, but at minimal costs, and at the same time contribute towards reduction in the global warming as well. So I don't want to bore you because I'm not a panelist, but I just want to thank you all for your attendance and thank you for your support to these climate thematic days. And again, I call on all of us, let us all unite for climate action together, further and faster. Thank you.
Many thanks, Your Excellency. I wonder if you could join us a little bit more. I know that your agenda is extremely busy, but we have two presentations to set the scene. And then we are going to sit for a panel. And I would like to invite the two presentations. One is on the general aspects, on the global aspects of soil organic carbon. And the presenter is Mr. Luca Montanarella. He is the chair of the Intergovernmental Technical Panel on Soils and works at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. Am I correct, Luca? Am I introducing you properly? You are most welcome. You can use that podium if you are more comfortable. And I wonder if we have the PowerPoint uploaded.
I hope so.
There is one?
Yes, there is one.
So the colleagues are going to make sure that it comes up. And then after Luca, we will have a presentation from Mr. Tekini Nakidakida. Am I correct, Tekini, with your name? Yes. You may want to join us at once here because we can see the presentation in the screens. And Tekini is also from Fiji. He works at the Ministry of Agriculture. Please, you can escort Mr. Minister there and not feel alone. Tekini will talk to us about soil management and climate change mitigation and soil organic carbon in the Pacific Islands. After these two sessions, we are going to bring a panel, and we are going to try to do the panel as much interactive with you as possible. So, Luca, the floor is yours for setting the scene at the global level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eduardo, and good morning, everybody, Honorable Minister, ladies and gentlemen. I will very briefly introduce to you the outcomes from a symposium we organized jointly as a collective presentation of the panel that I'm here representing. As Eduardo was mentioning, I'm working at the European Commission where I'm dealing with soils, but I'm also currently chairing the Intergovernmental Technical Panel on Soils, which is a body embedded into the Global Soil Partnership hosted by FAO. And the panel is made up of 27 colleagues, scientists nominated across the globe. Some of them are also involved in IPCC and in IPBES, so we try also to ensure the cross-cutting collaboration with other similar panels dealing with similar issues, as soils are a cross-cutting issue and needs to be dealt in a multidisciplinary way. I will spend 2 words before I talk about the outcome of the conference of what we are passionate about in our work. As soil scientists, we are passionate about soils, and when we talk about soils, it means we are passionate about what happens below ground. Particularly in this session, we are passionate about what happens to the organic fraction, which is in the soil profile, so the organic matter that you will find when you dig a hole in the ground. This organic matter is well known to the scientists because it has a very complex equilibrium, and particularly interesting is to understand the relation over time under different management practices of the organic carbon pool in the soils. In this graph that you see here, you see the amount of carbon in relation to the time, and if you go on a natural condition, you will have a certain level of carbon in your soil, and if you start doing some land management of any kind, you will have a change, and usually this change is a decrease of soil organic carbon over time. Still, you stabilize your carbon again at a certain level that will depend on your management practice. If your management practice is not a good one, you will continue depleting this carbon. This is the red part of the graph that you see there. If your management practice is a positive one, you will build up your carbon again, possibly till the level of the natural climax situation. But maybe with new technologies, and I will also mention that, you can even go beyond the natural capacity of soil to store carbon and accumulate above the natural stable amount of carbon that in that condition, in that site, can be stored in the soils that you are currently managing. Now, all this just to introduce that we had a very important event this year hosted by FAO in Rome in March, 21st to 23rd of March. And the interesting bit of this event was that for the first time we had a joint event between different organizations on this cross-cutting issue that is soil organic carbon management at global scale. It was somehow coordinated effort from the different panels from the scientific point of view, so the Intergovernmental Technical Panel on Soils, which I'm chairing, but also together with IPCC, IPBES, and the Science Policy Intervention of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. And it was hosted by FAO, and I think it was a big success in this sense because it allowed to bring together nearly 500 participants from more than 100 countries, and particularly it allowed to bring together scientists together with policymakers. We were enjoying the opening statement by the president of Fiji, and also the presence of the 2 executive secretaries from the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change and also from the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, the 2 conventions that are particularly, let's say, active in the area of soils and particularly of soil organic carbon management. All the outcomes are available. I mean, I don't spend more time. You can download the outcome document as well, the related ancillary documentations, presentations, and all what you are interested in. Just a few highlights to you of the recommendations. The recommendations, first of all, put the accent on the need to invest in capacity building in those countries that still don't have that much of activities in this area. And so the capacity development to avail at national level in order to have at national level the necessary data, the information to assess soil organic carbon levels was particularly the first recommendation. I will come back to that later on during the presentation. Then there was expressed the need to have clear guidelines how to measure and how to verify the levels of soil organic carbon in globally and nationally so that we can also report about changes. This is a crucial issue, particularly for this convention. If we are not able to report about changes in soil organic carbon, it will be very difficult to take it into account in any type of climate change discussion. The other recommendations were related to the issue that we must consider carbon in soils also in relation to other issues, for example, nitrogen balance. You cannot deal with carbon without dealing with the nitrogen in soils, and as you know, N2O emissions are on the other side quite important greenhouse gas factor, and so you need to consider the carbon management in a more holistic way, in a more interdisciplinary way. And of course, you must also try to highlight the short-term economic benefits in applying soil organic carbon management practices which are positive in the sense of accumulating and sequestering more carbon in the soils. Final set of recommendations was about the need to pay particular attention to the areas which have very high organic carbon levels. You may know that 4 countries on this planet hold more than 50% of the total soil organic carbon. These are the Russian Federation, Canada, United States, and Brazil. This soil organic carbon pool is very important, and it's mostly concentrated on what we call organic soils, so soils which have more than 20% of organic matter, typically peatlands, typically highly organic soils in the boreal areas. So these soils are particularly delicate and should be protected because emissions from these soils could be massive if there is a massive land use change happening there. So we should prioritize those areas, but also prioritize sustainable management actions there where we can have the biggest benefit on the short term, and particularly, of course, always taking into account that the land is mostly in private hands, so you need to involve from the onset the local land users and landowners. So just to close, or to say that there is plenty of literature, also very recent literature, about the fact that there are very effective possibilities to use greenhouse gas mitigation in the agricultural sector, particularly in soil management. You will find here a graph giving you the potential of greenhouse gas mitigation for different, in relation to the area that is affected. As you see, particularly restoring histosols, so organic soils, the far end to the right hand here, is having a very high potential in very small areas. But this, of course, maybe for later discussion. Finally, I would like to close saying that one of the major products that you will see by end of this year will be the new Global Soil Organic Carbon Map, which is a flagship product of the Intergovernmental Panel that is currently in its process of being finalized and is a collaborative effort collecting from national authorities and from national soil surveys soil organic carbon data that are the most updated and most detailed ones, and putting them all together into a global system that is currently under development and will be released officially on the World Soil Day that you may know is on the 5th of December. So this 5th of December 2017, we will release the new Global Soil Organic Carbon Map, and you're invited, of course, to consult this data then on the online system that I suppose FAO will hosting. So the way forward for all of us is to work together and to continue developing this field, which is particularly important for greenhouse gas mitigation. And this will be done through various initiatives that are ongoing. The working group that will now work on the methodologies and guidelines for management, but also in the technical manual that will be provided in order to do implementation on the ground. Networks that are getting established, particularly on the soils, as I mentioned, that have very high organic level, the so-called black soils. And then, of course, special projects that are ongoing in implementing this issue within the voluntary guidelines for sustainable soil management. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Luca. Please don't go anywhere. Join us here. I would like to invite now Tekini, Mr. Tekini Nakidakida, works at the Ministry of Agriculture of Fiji. Your boss here. I know it's a bit complicated when we have the boss present, but when we have a boss like Minister Inia, I think that thing's much easier. Tekini is from the research program of that, and he's going to tell us about soil organic carbon in the Pacific Islands. That would be a nice link with the global picture that Luca just presented. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, colleagues. Honorable Minister and members of the agriculture family. As mentioned by our Minister this morning, that Fiji is in the forefront of climate change and mitigation and adaptation. For agriculture is very important. So I'm going to, very briefly, just share about some of the practices or way forward that we've been practicing in Fiji and also in some of the small island states in the Pacific. So, sorry. Yeah. So, all this while we've been trying to upskill our farmers, or the members of our states, on why soil. Because soil is the foundation of vegetation. Deforestation, urbanization, and most of the other practices, all of these accelerate erosion. And altogether, including the climate change effects of saline water intrusion, these are some of the factors that affect crop production and harm food security. And all of these reduce the organic matter components in the soil. So why soil carbon is, as said by Ms. Luca, is that soil has 2 to 3 times more carbon than that is in the atmosphere. And it is the main component of soil organic matter. It indicates soil health. The color of the soil, that is what soil carbon does. And it contributes to food production. And in the Pacific, we are mostly trying to adapt to the effects of climate change. That is some of the things that we're doing in order to achieve some of our sustainable development goals. And some of the practices that we are trying to advise our farmers or our citizens of the Pacific Island states is to come away from previous management practices and try to change the way in order to improve soil carbon content in the soil. So, burning of crop residue, this has been the practice in sugarcane belts of Fiji. And that is what we are trying to move away from in order to incorporate all those carbon into the soil. It is hard to change, but change should happen if we expect better results. And these are some of the marginal lands or that the dry zones that our minister has mentioned has been experiencing months of dry spell. There's a group working on some afforestation in Fiji, is that trying to adapt in these marginal or dry zones. They make heavy mulching on the trees. First is to reforest those marginal lands, and then agroforestry techniques will come in order to ensure our food security for our local and smallholder farmers. So soil conservation methods has been practiced and taught to all our farmers. Irrespective of scale of farming, we always try to advise on how to incorporate carbon or sustainable methods of farming to the farmers in Fiji and the island states. So sources of carbon in our Pacific Island countries are mostly livestock manure and compost and biochar, etc. So we think that we have to be collaborative in order to have a maintained and carbon-rich soils, foster the carbon sequestration. So moving away from burning and slashing and try to incorporate all of those organic matters back into the soil. All of this, we think, it's imperative because it has to change the soil structure and improve root conditions. So adapting mitigation in agriculture will be minimal in our Pacific Islands because we are trying to focus more on adaptation, which is very, very important because mitigation will be for developed countries who have higher carbon emissions. For the Pacific Islands, we try to adapt more and have a sustainable crop practices which involves soil organic carbon and incorporate more organic matter into the soil. So employing methods to sequester more carbon, and we're hoping to that it will negate the carbon that is emitted when we try to ensure food security through the use of machineries and fertilizers. So the net exchange of all this methane, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, all this carbon exchange happening in the soils, it can be also expressed in terms of greenhouse gas intensity. So I think our colleagues from IPCC or scientists in the family, we can know that greenhouse gas intensity shows the intensity of the practice that we will employ. So greenhouse gas intensity, greenhouse gas emission. Basic mathematics will tell us that to reduce the intensity, we have to increase the denominator, which is the yield. So that is why improving productivity in Pacific Island countries, in crops and animal production, this is key to reduce the intensity of greenhouse gas. So employing all methods of agricultural practice, sustainable, resilient, and hoping that improving all this productivity gradually or fast in these coming years, we hope that we'll already be negating this carbon that we emit from our small island countries in the Pacific. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tekini. It's so interesting, really interesting to see solutions coming up and to see that increasing productivity contributes to reducing emissions. And in agriculture, this is fundamental because we need to produce more with less. We need to produce more food with less water, with no deforestation. FAO, my Director General, normally insists on the issue that we have to produce more food. We have to produce maybe 50, 60% more food by 2050, and we don't, the year 2050, to cope with the increasing population, but we don't have to cut one more tree to produce this food. And in the livestock session that just preceded us, they talked about 30% reduction on emissions from the livestock area, which would be a lot related to increasing productivity. So thank you very much for us to see the solutions from these areas. And now we would like to have a bit more of dynamism and have a panel. And I would like to invite the panelists to join us here. They would be Madame Jo House from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. Jo, you are most welcome, and maybe you want to escort Mr. Minister here. Thank you very much. And I have my colleague from the World Meteorological Organization, the director of the research department, Dion Terblanche. Dion, you are most welcome. Yes, you may want to sit there. I would also like to invite Jean-Luc, Dr. Jean-Luc Chotet. Am I pronouncing? Chot? Okay. A good friend from he's really representing the scientific body of the United Nations Convention on Combating Desertification. And I cannot recognize Josiane. She's not coming, right, Luca? Luca is a good representative of the European Commission with us. Josiane was invited. Unfortunately, she couldn't make for today here in Bonn. I think we have excellent panel to move ahead with us with some interesting questions. And I think I will first ask each panelist to introduce yourself more properly, why you're interested in soil organic carbon, and especially the three colleagues that joins us here, and who are you and how long have you been working on this. But do it in 1 minute for us to gain the time, while I get the questions that my colleagues in Rome send to you, and they are tough, so I have to make them properly.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming today. My name's Jo House and thanks for the really good talks already. I work at the University of Bristol on land and climate interactions. I'm also IPCC lead author since the 3rd assessment report through to the 5th one on working groups 1, 2 and 3, and I work on the methods report side, and I'm currently lead author on the 2019 update to the 2006 guidelines on greenhouse gas inventory methods, and on the special report on climate change and land. And I've also worked in government for a while in the UK. Do you want me to just say something briefly about the IPCC updates? Or?
That would be, I think, informative. Everybody, we share, every two of us share one mic. Most of us are informed, very well informed about IPCC, but not everyone. It's so interesting to know why the scientific body is interested in what you're doing. So it would be nice to know about IPCC and its process, please.
So soils are really central to a lot of what we do in IPCC. In the assessment reports, we're obviously assessing the science, and that includes information on emissions from soils and impact of climate change on soils. I mentioned about the inventory work. There's a whole methodology on doing your greenhouse gas inventories that includes very specific methods on both organic and soils and mineral soils. And we're currently updating the 2006 guidelines to include things like the new information on carbon stocks, new guidance on methodologies, and some more elaborations of the more complex methodologies. They come in 3 tiers. And that update will be published in 2019, or the refinement will be published in May 2019. We're also doing 3 special reports at the moment in response to government requests, one on 1.5 degrees, one on oceans and cryosphere, and one on the land. And the one on the land, we have chapters on desertification, degradation, greenhouse gas flux, and they'll all include a large element of soils, both impacts on soils and mitigation. And there's also a chapter on synergies and trade-offs, which will touch on some of the co-benefits of soil-based mitigation. And that's due to come out in September 2019.
Thank you. Dion, would you like to introduce yourself? Now I think we know more the process, and we are so happy to contribute to the IPCC process. Dion, from the World Meteorological Organization and the research department of it that you lead, can you tell us?
Sure. The World Meteorological Organization is one of the specialized agencies of the United Nations.
Just sit up a little bit closer to your mouth.
Can you hear me? Sure. Okay, so the World Meteorological Organization is one of the specialized agencies of the United Nations, and its mandate covers the elements of weather, climate, water, and related environmental issues, including the composition of the atmosphere. I head the research department, and so I oversee the work of the World Climate Research Program that feeds directly into the IPCC, but also the Global Atmosphere Watch, which is the program that does harmonized measurements of atmospheric composition, including greenhouse gases around the world, and the World Weather Research Program. So the interest in this topic, of course, is that this is one of the uncertainties in the modeling efforts, including the issues related to permafrost, and that is why WMO has decided to properly engage in this matter so that we can refine the models, improve the observations, and do a better job at covering this very important aspect.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank, FAO to have invited, UNFCCC SPI to be on the panel. And just a few words in my personal background. I did my PhD on, carbon dynamic in, French soil. And after that, I got a position and through IRD, and I spent almost 20 years in West Africa countries. And when you go on the ground, when you see farmers looking for organic carbon, and when you see the effect of organic carbon on maintaining soil fertility and improving, productivity, that it is why I have always been working on organic carbon. And it is why, because UNCCD is dealing with, land degradation and desertification, I just joined the SPI group. SPI group is a group of 20 experts, 10 mandated by parties, 10, selected because of their scientific background. And the very innovative issue that on the same group, you have representative of parties and research and scientific. And there is also 3 seats for observer. And land degradation neutrality has been, a huge project run by UNCCD SPI, and it has been adopted during the COP13 in Ordos. And one of the metrics of land degradation neutrality is soil carbon stock. So here we are.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So you are now informed about the level we have here, and it's very high, and I'm very happy. Before I start putting the questions, we have about 54 minutes to go. The watch there are very helpful to tell us to go. If we use the time that was been allocated to us for the session, I would like to say that the evolution of the science behind this is very important, but we have to put it in a language that non-scientists can understand. So I will have a surprise in the end. I will ask for someone that's not a scientist to talk to us and see what he or she has learned about the session. And I am talking about a colleague that we invited today to join us, Terran Giacomini. She's from I have to have it the right name. Terran, you may want to introduce yourself too.
Hey, where do you want me to sit?
Over there.
Over here?
But I need the mic.
Oh, you need that one.
It's one for two. There's a mic there.
Okay.
Terran will introduce herself and tell us, we catch her here to try to translate the language that we are discussing into how we understand this. You gave me exactly your affiliation, but maybe you want to repeat
I
it.
can clarify that, yes. So my name is Terran Giacomini. I'm from the National Farmers Union in Canada, which is an organization of farmers from across commodity sectors and different scales. And we're a member of the global peasant movement, La Via Campesina, which many of you've probably heard about. So you want me to provide some reflections on what we've heard so far?
Yes.
Okay.
At the end,
At
I
the
want you
end.
to help me taking notes and look from your perspective, from the Farmers Association in Canada and Via Campesina in general, how soil organic carbon and climate reflect, or what you think that we can contribute to this. So
Okay.
if you help me with that, it would be at the end of the
I
session.
can help you with that.
Thank you very much. So I would start with you, Joe. And that also improves a bit the gender balance in this panel, which was pretty bad, I have to say, although very well represented by the two ladies that are joining us now here. IPCC, I will put two questions. My colleagues asked me to put two questions to you. IPCC started a new cycle. You explained to us. You have the assessment report coming up in 2019. Why is an updated IPCC guidelines on monitoring soil organic carbon stocks and soil organic carbon changes necessary? What's the relationship of this and the recommendations that came on the global symposium that we organized earlier this year in Rome together with IPCC, SPI, and the World Meteorological Organization? And also in that symposium, the chair of IPCC, the secretary, Mr. Moxit, he raised the issue that one of the main gaps identified in the fifth assessment report was missing globally harmonized and standardized data on soils. So how can the link to the efforts achieved and to be further developed within this network, international network of national soil information institutions, the Global Soil Partnership, and the global soil organic carbon that Luca just referred to us would contribute to this general effort of improving soil organic carbon data?
Thank you, Eduardo, and to whoever asked the questions. So first, just to clarify, the assessment report, which will be the sixth assessment report, is different from the methods update and the special reports. So the sixth assessment report cycle is just beginning, and that won't be done till 2022. The methods report, which I think is what the questioner really wants to know about, is to update the 2006 guidelines, because 2006 was quite a while ago, and since then there's been lots of new information. And so the particular needs were identified, scoped with governments and with scientists. So particularly things like information on soil carbon stocks and on changes in soil carbon stocks, to provide updates to the emissions factors database that countries use, and then some new guidelines on the methodologies that countries might use for modeling or incorporating newer soil models and more country-specific data. And so there's a need for this update, really, because they're the good practice guidance and good practice guidelines, and good practice is that countries are using the best available scientific knowledge. And in relation to things like the soil map that was being developed, that Luca talked about, and also the ISRIC soil product. So there's conversations going on between IPCC and ITP and ISRIC and others to see how useful those products might be to us and if there's need to develop new products. IPCC doesn't do science, but we assess the available science and we assess what's helpful in the methods. And definitely where there are available maps like this, and for countries that lack country-specific data, these kind of products can be extremely useful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for bringing light on this. Your Excellency, my pleasure. It's not only, we are very honored to have the presence of the Minister of Agriculture of Fiji, but it's not only because we have the space here. I would like to make sure that we have the other panelists. We are waiting. Mr. Nazir Fouad, are you in the room? Can I see you? Yes. Nazir, would you be able to join us in the panel? Nazir is from the Peatland Restoration Agency of Indonesia, and we all know how important it is to have the peatland perspectives on this. So if you could take the seat, please, and maybe, yes, in the middle, and maybe you can introduce yourself as, sorry that I jumped immediately on you, but as the others have already introduced themselves, can you please do so? And why the interest on this? I mean, peatland says everything, but you may want to say exactly about the work of the Peatland Restoration Agency of Indonesia.
Yeah, hello, thank you for invitations. I am Nazir Fouad, head of the Peatland Restoration Agency. This is a new agency set up by the President of Indonesia, report directly to the President. As Indonesia have the largest tropical peatland in the world, but also about half of our peatland is degraded and some badly drained and causing a lot of problems, including fires. The President instruct us that Indonesian peatland has to be protected and restore part of the area, restore part of the area can be used sustainably for agriculture or other purposes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll come back to questions to you in the end because it's such a specific aspect. I would like to go broader to my colleague at the World Meteorological Organization, Dion. How is the soil organic carbon preservation and sequestration and its interaction with climate predictions addressed at the work that you are doing in the research department at the WMO? Is the preservation of the largest soil organic carbon stocks, such as under permafrost, realistic and feasible under the climate change scenarios? Would you like to come up with those ones?
Sure, thank you. Those are very good questions and very relevant ones. Before we get into answering them, I just want to remind everybody again that the World Meteorological Organization every year issues the Greenhouse Gas Bulletin. And the Greenhouse Gas Bulletin every year is launched by WMO, and that was done just more than a week ago. And we saw for 2016 increase of 3.3 parts per million in the global greenhouse gas concentrations related to CO2, which is the largest increase on record. So we are actually lucky that the environment and nature is good because the oceans and the terrestrial biosphere absorbs about half of the emissions that we put into the atmosphere, but it's what stays behind in the atmosphere that really drives climate and impacts on the oceans and the environment in general. So with this as background, it is quite important that we understand the carbon cycle much better. And as we have heard, the soils of the world plays a very important role in this and contains very large stocks of this. So if you just think about the first meter of soil in the world stores about twice as much carbon than we have in the atmosphere. So any changes there will have dramatic impacts on the world, as we know. So this is the baseline. So WMO engaged in this whole issue by being a co-sponsor of the Global Symposium on Soil Organic Carbon that was mentioned already earlier. And from the recommendations that we saw, we thought that the two that we would really engage in is on recommendation 2 and 3. 2 is on the issue of the guidelines for measuring, mapping monitoring and related to the global soil organic carbon map, which is also then a very important input into the modeling work that will be done by WCRP and then eventually being assessed by IPCC. So we complete the cycle in such a way. But also in terms of recommendation 3, which is related to the interactions between carbon and nitrogen, because in the Global Atmosphere Watch we have the global standards of how you go about to measure the gaseous phases of these compounds. And so we can also bring something to the table in terms of best practices on measurement techniques. The Global Atmosphere Watch is also launching a system that is being discussed in COP as well, and that is called the Integrated Global Greenhouse Gas Information System, because we have now moved beyond the state of just using observations to understand better. If we combine observations and modeling as we do in reanalysis to get a better idea of what the high resolution past look like, we can also do the same when it comes to the greenhouse gases. And this integrated global greenhouse gas information combines high accuracy measurements in the atmosphere with inverse modeling so that you can have an additional source of information. And it's scalable. You can take it down to small areas and you can actually, don't want to use the word verify, but you can add value and reduce the uncertainty on the emissions. Because I think it's extremely important that our actions be measured where it matters. And to me, it really matters in the atmosphere, and it's quite clear where it matters there, because that's where the radiator forcing for the climate system happens, and that is where the whole chain reaction is set off. So if we do something on the terrestrial biosphere, on the way we treat our soils, we must be able to follow that through in measurements of the impact on the atmosphere. And with this system, which is scalable, you can then verify some of these issues. But of course, WMO is also a co-sponsor of the World Climate Research Program, as I mentioned. And there are several initiatives in the World Climate Research Program that addresses soil organic carbon and its interaction with the Earth system. In terms of CLIC, it's one of the core projects of WCRP. It deals with the icy parts of the world, and of course, it is also a partner of the International Permafrost Association. So in terms of permafrost, we store about 4 times as much carbon as mankind has ever released into the atmosphere in the permafrost. So it is extremely important, and there's a lot of uncertainty still around that. It needs to be better treated in the next cycle of the IPCC, and WCRP is working towards dealing with that in a much better way. So if you just think about 4 times as much as we have already released in the atmosphere, any instabilities in the permafrost of the world can really have a positive feedback and tremendous chain reaction that will put us in real danger. So this understanding of the carbon cycle is, of course, extremely important. Also through the WCRP CMIP, that's the model intercomparison project that feeds directly into IPCC. There's a specific initiative that deals with the coupled climate carbon cycle modeling efforts. But in WCRP, there's also one of these grand challenges that deals specifically with carbon in the climate system. So I think from the WMO perspective, we really deal with this thing in a holistic way, and but it's the detail, like the detail we discussed today, that needs to build up into getting a better picture of what is going on. I think I will stop there.
Thank you very much. I think you provide a lot already, some very interesting and somehow scary information too, on the perspectives of managing soils and the impacts on the climate change. I'm very glad to hear that the research is developing on this and they are learning more and more. Talking about this, Jean-Luc, the UNFCCC just finished its conference of the party in China. Land degradation neutrality target is now, I think, adopted by more than 100 countries. And it's mentioned very clearly in the Sustainable Development Goal 15 on land, in its target 15.3, having a land degradation neutral world. And we know that one of the metrics in this measurement for a land degradation neutral world is soil organic carbon. Can you tell us about the benefits of achieving a land degradation neutrality, and how are we moving towards getting the countries prepared to measure and to report on the land degradation neutrality, what it impact on their economies, why they should engage on this, and if you think that this is soil organic carbon sequestration is feasible everywhere. Is it a recipe for all countries?
Yeah, thank you. Just before asking you this, your last question, land degradation neutrality is built on three main metrics, soil carbon stock and land cover and land productivity. And what said the LDN framework that we need to bring on the ground plan for action that will fit all these three main indicators. These three main indicators are, I would say, one out, all out. That's the main key message. If you provide a sustainable land management, this sustainable land management should fit in these two indicators. And by the way, I take the opportunity that at the same time that designing the LDN framework, SPI just did a data analysis on sustainable land management to address drought, land degradation, and desertification. And you will find in this, technical report a meta-analysis telling that if you do agroforestry, if you deal with cattle, or if you integrated fertilizer management, you will have impact of carbon stock, but also on biodiversity and so on. So it is why, if this type of sustainable land management are brought to the farmers, they will be able to improve their income, because as far as you increase soil organic carbon, you will increase soil fertility, and we are expecting to increase yield. That's the first point. That's a local. And at the national level, if we look at FAO did a very nice analysis on NDCs, and we all know now that NDCs are on the agenda. Agriculture is on agenda of NDCs of most countries, and particularly in developing countries, through mitigation, but also through adaptation. That means that by providing or by supporting sustainable land management, addressing degradation, desertification, and drought, parties will be able to fit in the NDCs and to contribute at a global scale to the mitigation of climate change. So that means that there is benefit for local farmers, for countries, but also at a global scale for all the community. And the last question.
Yes.
The first thing on land degradation neutrality is to prevent degradation, that to prevent soil organic carbon stock to decrease, to avoid that, and to try to increase. Of course, as if you see the carbon map, the carbon stock is not the same everywhere, because it will depend on land management practices, but also on soil texture. So we can increase, but accordingly to local condition, but also socioeconomic condition. It is why in one country or in one place, we should provide farmers with incentive to be able to transform their way to produce, to be able to, of course, meet their need for food, that food security, but also to make them part of the solution combating climate change. So we can achieve, or we can increase soil organic carbon, but not at the same level everywhere. And science research is trying to figure out where are the best location, the best means to increase soil organic carbon stock.
Thank you very much. Looking from agriculture perspective, I'm from FAO. I'm very happy to hear what you said, that sustainable production and avoiding degradation is the first step. And we have here with us Nazir Fouad, who's the head of the recently established Peatland Restoration Agency in Indonesia. And we would like to hear from you the challenge regarding conservation and restoration of peatland in a situation where livelihoods of especially smallholders are dependent on the use of peatland. You have to look at it in the aspects of conservation, restoration, and livelihoods. It's a big challenge that you have in your country, and we would like to learn from you how you are approaching this.
Thank you. Yes, indeed, a very tough situations. Let me describe this first. Indonesia have about 15 million hectares of peatland. If we are in Germany now, I guess that is double than the largest state in Germany, which is Bavaria. So it's about double in Bavaria. And out of that 15 million hectares of peatland spread in several provinces, there are one province, for example, which more than half of the land is in peatland. That province size is even bigger than Bavaria, and half of it is in peatland. And in that province, there is a district which size is also quite huge. It's like 5 times than Luxembourg, and 96% of the districts is in peatland. So, and there are people, of course, living there. Traditionally, some of our farmers have been cultivating crops that are suitable for wetland in the peatland traditionally, but we face a much bigger problems in the last 20 years or so, when a huge tract of peatland being drained and converted for commercial large-size plantation. That is the problem we're facing. It get drained too much. It started a huge forest fire in 2015 when we have strong El Nino. I think some of you must have read some articles published by scientists or in the CNN and Reuters that's saying that in the worst week of the forest fire in Indonesia, the daily carbon emission of Indonesia exceed daily US for 2 weeks. So it was very bad because of the fire in peatland. That's why in 2016, early in January, the president set up this agency to overcome the situation, preventing these kind of problems anymore. So what we need to do is, of course, first protecting all the remaining peatland, which have not been opened, keep it intact. Second, we need to restore this already degraded and drained peatland, but we have to also recognize peoples using those peatlands, including some companies which have already got license, legitimate license from previous governments that we have to also respect. So what we're doing now is we're developing methodology in doing the hydrological restoration. So in the dry months, we try to keep the peatland still moist and wet, so it's not easily caught fire. At the same time, we experimenting agriculture techniques with communities, with farmers, so their livelihood can improve. We have very good examples in certain areas in Kalimantan, in the island, that some farmers, indigenous people, have using peatland for rice farming. But they're doing it once a year only. And that's why in the dry months, they let it dry under the sun, and then they burn it before planting it. So we try to keep the production twice a year, so at least there are no times for leaving it and then burning it. And we can get to a point that the productivity per hectare increased at least double. So if they're now planting twice a year, they got 4 times bigger yield annually. But of course, that needs a lot of not only agriculture, but also more like a social and cultural changing. Farmer behavior is not easy, I'm sure. I mean, all farmers around the world are the same. And then in the meantime, we engage with a lot of scientists to do several things. First, in doing the hydrological restoration, we need to have a quite accurate estimation or a measurement on how high the water table increase. Daily, weekly, monthly, covering the whole peatland. We put out a sensor right on the field. But if we're talking about peatland size of 15 million hectares and spread all over the country, Indonesia is quite large, it's like Portugal to Moscow, the width of the country, then it's a lot of work and very expensive. So putting that sensors also coupled with help by some scientists, we're still developing the technique in estimating the soil moisture from satellite images. So it's combining the real measurement as well as a satellite. And some scientists show us that they can estimate more or less the carbon emission reduction if the pit is getting wetter and wetter. What does it mean if this kind of pit have 2 centimeters water higher? It will mean less decomposition of this carbon on the soil, and meaning also less carbon being emitted. Some science of doing monitoring, we need it a lot. Also science on how getting more productivity of crops that can grow well on pit. We're talking with FAO in Indonesia about paludi culture, for example. And also science dealing with big corporation, because the corporations also get huge already licenses, and how the business model of the corporation can be justified, what kind of crops they can also modify. So if the license have to be still going on, how can they make a good business without getting the draining continuing? This kind of stuff. Thank you.
That's a lot. Thank you very much, Nazir. I think we heard the presentations of Luca and Tekini. We heard the key points that have been raised by our panelists, and we don't have much more time, but I would like to hear from you. If you have any question, comment, or a sharp point. Unfortunately, you have to speak at the micro because we have interpretation. There are 2 micros in the middle of the room, or if you're sitting here in the front, I can just handle mine. Identify yourself, and then let's try to do a 1-minute question. Sorry, but we will have to be, very time effective here. So just be sharp, identify yourself, and put your point.
Hello, my name is Judy Searle from Mother Channel and from Cape Town Television. I have an important question because I believe that the soil microbes may be coming to the rescue of the phytoplankton in the sea, who are dying with the increased heat that the sea is absorbing, and with the increased acidity and chemicals that the sea is absorbing. And I was wondering if you think there's any possibility of being able to scale up, not only for agriculture, but people all over, to make nurturing microbes a prior responsibility to try and, because biomass under the soil is one of the fastest ways, I think, of getting carbon dioxide out of circulation.
Thank you very much. The relationship of soil biodiversity, seas, and the carbon and the climate. I have 2 persons queuing. Would you like to put your question?
Sure. Matthew Warnkin, I'm from Corporate Carbon. We're carbon project developers and aggregators in Australia. And recently we convened a soil carbon practitioners industry working group. We're very much invested and involved with on-the-ground soil carbon projects. My question to the panel would be twofold. One, firstly, what do you think the potential actually is worldwide for soil organic carbon to deliver sequestration, so in terms of quantifying that potential? And then what is then that key to unlock us in terms of achieving that potential? So I guess twofold comments from the panel would be very much appreciated.
Thank you very much, very precise. The potential of the world to sequester carbon in the soils and the key elements to achieve it. Then I have a lady over there. Please identify and put your point.
Yes, thank you. My name is Anne-Laure Sablé from a French NGO working on soil carbon sequestration. So I wanted to highlight 2 remarks. I really appreciate that the Minister of Fiji talked about food and nutrition security. I think this is very important. And we tend to talk about a lot of food production, but actually food security is also about access and quality and stability. And we produce enough to feed 12 billion people actually, but we have a lot of loss and waste, and there are still 815 million people suffering from hunger, and we also have 1 billion people with overweight. So I think we need to really try to broaden a little bit the discussion about food security and not only focusing on food production. And on soil carbon sequestration, two things that I haven't heard from the panelists is about non-permanence. Because soil carbon sequestration, when you reach the equilibrium of the sequestration of your sinks, then you won't sequestrate anymore. So it will be just about maintaining and storing the carbon, so it won't offset forever agricultural emissions. And obviously, agricultural emissions are about methane and nitrous oxide. If I'm not wrong, the IPCC AR 4 or 5, you may correct me, is saying that actually the carbon cycle is neutral for agriculture, and that mostly we are talking about methane and nitrous oxide. So I'm a little bit confused about this non-permanence not being addressed during those conversations and uncertainties about publications. We have so many scientist publications saying now that we have wide range of results. Sometimes you can sequester carbon, sometimes you can't. And it's more about, I think, adaptation, actually, that we should talk about soil carbon sequestration. And we are talking a lot about mitigation, but I think mitigation should be about reducing non-CO2 emissions from agriculture, so it's permanent reduction. And maybe we should focus on adaptation with, I would say, potential co-benefits about soil carbon sequestration, land degradation, neutrality, soil erosion, fertility. This is the main objective, I think, about soil questions and soil organic carbon. I don't want people to think that we have like an El Dorado of carbon and that we should just go for this and not addressing other permanent reductions. So please be careful with that. And I would like to see how the panelists think about having an adaptation approach rather than a mitigation. And if people are interested, we have this statement made by 80 organization called Our Land is Worth More Than Carbon, just to try to have a broader picture, a holistic approach about soil carbon sequestration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there are people willing to applaud. Thank you. You made your point, and I think we took note of the food relationship with soil organic carbon, with the non-permanence, and the issue of let's do mitigation because that's it. There's a whole point on adaptation that has to be taken care. I would take the last question now, and please identify and go to the point. Oh, there are two more. That will be the two very sharp one. Identify and put your question. Then I'll pass to the panel, and I'll give you 2 minutes for you to pinpoint. I'm very happy to see that the questions are very cross-cutting in general. So I think it will touch the heart of each one of you, and you put your approach. And then I'm looking at Terran in the end with the complexity of bringing this to the reality of the custodians of this land that we're talking in the soil, the farmers. I have the gentleman there, then I'll come to you, and then you will be the last question. Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Johannes Lehmann. I'm a soil scientist faculty at Cornell University studying soil carbon. I commend the different organizations to produce the soil carbon maps. That's an essential resource. I was wondering how we can move from a static soil map to a more dynamic soil map that is changing with practice-based modeling, and what kind of institution would volunteer to be the clearinghouse or the funded program leader for such an effort? Thank you.
Thank you, very precise. From static to a more dynamic soil map, and who would host this? Now, I think you may use my micro.
Thank you very much. I'm Arthur Reidacker from France, and we are a scientific and technical NGO for sustainable development. And I used to work very much in Africa in the past. So my question is, you have a whole range of solutions to decrease the emission of CO2 from the soil. And of course, when you go to Indonesia, in peatland, it's a very serious issue, and you have to deal with that first. But when you come to Africa, I think the first thing is to increase productivity of land, to avoid deforestation, because the population is going to double in the next 50 years or less. That means you can either double the area, that means deforestation, and the deforestation will send in the atmosphere much more carbon than the amount that you can store in the soil. So, and this is really a main issue, and if we don't tackle with that, we are not going to tackle properly with the issue of food security either.
Thank you very much. I see this more a statement which we entirely concur that increasing productivity is the backbone of feeding the world. If we give 2 minutes to each panelist, we have 12 minutes, that's what you have, and then we'll still have a few minutes for Terran to wrap up, and we will conclude with some delay, but still on time. We have 5 questions, or maybe 4 questions and 1 comment ahead of us. And I think you took note, the relationship with sea, soil, the potential on the sequestration, the relationship of food adaptation and the non-permanence, the static versus a dynamic soil map, and the issue of productivity. Let me start with Joe.
Thank you for some very interesting questions. So soil carbon and biodiversity, just to say that soil carbon, biodiversity tends to increase with soil carbon, so anything we do to improve soil carbon also helps with biodiversity potentially, but I'm afraid I can't talk about the phytoplankton. I'm afraid I don't know too much about that. So the potential for soil sequestration, there's been a lot of recent papers. There was, in addition to the one that Lucas showed, there was a paper by Pete Smith that looked at the potential for biochar and the potential for soil sequestration, both being about 0.7 petagrams of CO2 equivalent per year. And actually that touches on the other lady's question about permanence. So soil sequestration might reach a capacity that biochar doesn't. You can continue to take CO2 out of the atmosphere that way. Then there was a very recent paper that paper was a 2016 one. Then there was a recent paper by Griscom, just came out in the last few weeks in PNAS, that also looked at different natural solutions, and there they had peat restoration, coastal restoration, avoided peat destruction, all of those being about 1 gigaton of CO2e per year by 2030. So, and that's something all of these sorts of papers will be reviewing in the IPCC special report on climate change and land. And there was a comment on how you help this to happen, and actually having these things, if they're in the IPCC methods and countries have to report on them, then that helps to incentivize. And there's a wetlands report that came out in 2013 that included a lot of new methods on wetland drainage and rewetting. So if it's in there, then it helps to incentivize. And that helps on the road to achievement, hopefully, if they're incentivized with the governments. Again, on a question about, what's talked about the permanence, but the non-CO2 emissions from soils are also considered important. There's a lot more information, and again, that's part of the IPCC methods for countries to report on the non-greenhouse gas, and again, it's part of something we assess in the assessment reports. And totally agree about adaptation and mitigation co-benefits. And there's a lot more talk now about mitigation and the co-benefits, and there's been a lot more information. Again, that's something we need to assess. There was another good paper by Pete Smith in Nature about that. Mitigation, avoiding deforestation, I think was your point. I'm not quite sure. I totally agree. Soil carbon options haven't particularly been in the integrated assessment model scenarios that the IPC has available to assess, and I think that's something we can do moving forward to include that. But yeah, any mitigation options should really avoid deforestation. Completely agree.
Thank you so much. Continue on the science aspect. I think, Jean-Luc, would you like to take the floor now, or you want me to go on the row? Maybe you can do this, then Deon, then we move to the colleagues from this side. Please.
Yes, I will be very, very quick and sharp. Yes, of course, we are talking about, permanent solution through, building biomass production, because we have to keep in mind that to sequester carbon, we need to produce biomass. And of course, this, new technology with sustainable land management should not be implemented in 1 year. It should take almost 20 years. That's the way to do permanent option and to put agriculture on the permanent option for climate change. And the good property, if you put more carbon in the soil, you need to have more biomass, and by having more biomass, you may have, or you have some more food. That means the loop is, the cycle is closed. Carbon, biomass, food security, and adaptation. That's my main point.
Thank you very much. Theo, would you like to contribute to the answers to these questions, please?
Yeah, I'll also be short. I think that we are faced with really tough choices in life, especially as we move into this 21st century. And we've heard today that these tough choices require information and data and process understanding. And we have set up a system that works well, and we should use those systems. And I'll explain a little bit how I see it, but also invest in those systems that we have the information to make wise choices. And that system is the system of science being assessed by the IPC and then feeds into the UNFCCC discussions. And I'm fairly early in this food chain with the programs that I'm involved in, the World Climate Research Program and Global Atmosphere Watch. But I think this is the process. And at the beginning of this process is this detailed process understanding of how the Earth system works. And this also applies to soil, organic carbon, and the fluxes between the atmosphere. Because as I mentioned in the beginning, we need not to lose our concentration on the atmosphere, because this is where the important processes happen. This is where the radiator forcing happens that drives the temperature increase, and this is where the severe weather and the impacts eventually happen as well. And so we are intimately connected through our actions through this complicated Earth system. And only by understanding and measuring and modeling this better, we will find the solutions that makes a difference.
Thank you very much. Maybe I'll go to the country perspectives before coming to you, Luca, because I'm looking at you with double hat, with the ITPS, but also with the European Commission. So at the end, we have to see how much does it cost and where we will mobilize resource to put the science and the policy into practice. So I'll come to you on this, but I would like to hear from Nazir and from Tekini from their perspectives on the peatland and on the Pacific Islands and the questions that have been put. Would you come first, Nazir?
Yes, what we learned in the last, let's say 10 years or so, we believe that the weather extreme will happen more and more often. We've seen what happened in Europe and in US for extreme drought and fires happening. And in Indonesia, we believe that the peatland, which can hold water, and a lot of Indonesian tropical peatland, they are rain-fed peatland. So if the water is not well kept and regulated during the rainy seasons, during the dry months, it got not only dried, but also the water that can be provided for lower areas will be no longer available. So if we can keep that water regulations well, it does not only avoid the fires in the peatland, but also the water can peatland provide water for agriculture in surrounding areas. I think that's very important. Modeling on how the water should be regulated, modeling on how the rainfall continuing for the next month or the next week, and when the rain stop and we entering the the dry season, that all of that data is very useful for the management of the water regulations on the ground. I believe it costs much less than if we have the drought happen and so on. In our calculation, our Ministry of Economic Affairs believe that the cost used to do these preventions type of disasters of drought is 25 times cheaper than if we face with a disaster, 25 times cheaper. So of course, from policy perspective, it's send a signal to the Minister of Finance, you allocate this kind of a budget for this in comparison for the mitigations of the disaster. So, and the science are very important and telling this modeling. That's what can I say.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And Tekini.
Yeah, thank you very much. In the case for Pacific Island states, sequestering carbon is a traditional agriculture practice for forefathers. Changing into conventional has brought about monocropping and all this. So trying to reverse the process is a bit hard, trying to convince our farmers to take up all these new techniques that we are proposing. But in order to negate all these small emissions that come out from our production, like my colleague said there, we have to increase productivity. Productivity alone will reduce the intensity of the methods of agriculture practice that we employ. So, and also the closed cycle that has been mentioned by my colleague, that it is true that carbon and food security and biomass, with that closed cycle, we're able to maintain carbon levels in the soil and have that cycle closed for improved food security. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Takini. Luca, we have to, it's very nice to see soil as it is now in the climate agenda, the gaining momentum, and the requirement of increasing productivity, that is also a fundamental question. We know that soil organic carbon increase will help us on this regard. We are very optimistic on this. This all have a cost, and science has its own path, and we are running against time. How do you put these things together and try to focus on the questions that the colleagues put here to us today?
Yeah, thank you, Eduardo. I mean, it's a difficult one, of course, and a complex one. But first of all, let me say that really thanks again for organizing this, because it's not the first time that I come to the COP of this convention and we have a discussion on soil organic carbon. We had similar events also in previous COPs. And I must say it's since COP21 that really we have here momentum, and I would like also to acknowledge the contribution from our colleagues from France in initiating a very strong process in promoting the benefits that we could have by increasing soil organic carbon levels globally. So I would really like to say that there is a big potential that it's getting more and more recognized. Coming to the questions, I must say that I don't have the time to respond to all, but I was very impressed by your question because you've put the finger on two things which are very important. First, the relation between the terrestrial environment and the marine environment, which is always forgotten, that we should never consider all these issues in isolation, but there's a very close relation between what happens in the ocean and what we do on land. And secondly, the issue of biodiversity in soils. This is a very neglected issue in the past. We as Commission have been investing a lot in the past years in raising the awareness that we must invest more in understanding biodiversity below ground. By the way, we published last year a global soil biodiversity atlas that you may enjoy if you want, and you can download it freely from the European Commission websites. But particularly we are happy that there is now a momentum. We just had a few weeks ago the Global Soil Biodiversity Conference, the second one. And also there's a call to do really something more related also to what we do within more binding situations like conventions. We should recall that in 2006 we had a COP decision by CBD, by the Convention for Biodiversity, to establish a global soil biodiversity initiative with FAO in charge. So I think there is something there that still needs to be done on that issue that you're raising, and I'm very much supportive of what you're saying, because it's something we, at least in Europe, consider very important. The second question that I would like to spend a few words is the one of Johannes, because you're putting the finger on the problem of the global soil organic carbon maps or global soil organic carbon data that we have. And this is the finger on the fact that collecting soil data and soil information is very expensive. You need to go on the ground, you need to measure. So the global soil carbon map that we will present in December, which I just highlighted very briefly, is a collection of national contributions that come from very different times. You will have a map made up of data coming on a range from 50 years. So it means some countries provide data of 20 years ago, some of 30 years ago, some have more updated information. And you are rightly mentioning we can't really do anything if we don't have the tools to measure change over time of soil organic carbon levels. And this requires, of course, an investment. We in Europe, as European Commission, have established a system which is called LUCAS, which is a system that measures regularly every 5 years on a point sampling system, soil organic carbon levels. It's a very expensive system. So if you ask me who could host it, well, in the European Union there is the European Commission, but I'm not sure globally who could do this, maybe FAO. But I don't believe that this is really the solution. I think you need to involve the local landowners and the local actors, so the farmers, in the data collection process as well. I don't believe in a top-down approach so much anymore, but maybe it's my own experience in that. Finally, I would like to say a few words on the lady that was raising the issue that we should not always think only of soil organic carbon as the solution for everything. I could not agree more, even so I'm here pleading for soil organic carbon in this meeting, but definitely you need to consider this in the broader context of what is going on this planet. And so you cannot consider soil organic carbon as a simple solution for all the complex problems we have. You need to consider all the interlinkages with other issues. Many of them have been mentioned during this debate now, but this is really important. Now, of course, you wanted to hear about money, and this is, of course, the wrong person you're asking, but I can tell you that in the European Commission, we are having a very intense debate right now on this issue, particularly because in-house, we have a discussion on our own common agricultural policy, of course, but also on all the development aid that we invest globally. We are one of actually the biggest donor globally. So it's a topic that is under discussion because we very much believe it's an important topic. That's why also we strongly supported the Global Soil Partnership in its establishment. I hope that we will get more and more momentum also from other sides of the world, not only from Europe, because I think everybody should work together on this, not just in one part of the planet, but it's a global issue and it should be addressed globally.
Thank you very much, Luca. And I would like just to recall very important points that he raised. The protagonic role of France and Minister Lefort in COP21, who raised the importance of soils, and we are an effect of that being here today at this level in COP. So this is, thank you very much for reminding us of the importance. And then the Moroccan government also in COP22 put a protagonic role on soil. And we are very hopeful that the momentum continue. Now the Estonian presidency in the European Commission, the European Union, also put soil in their agricultural agenda as the #1 point of debate. It's on soil contamination. Now, as I'm an FAO, and Iluka mentioned that who could host the cost, could bear the cost of having these global sampling systems. And if people say that you keep silent, you say it means yes. I have to say something because we have the same perspective of you. Building country capacity and countries having the capacity for monitoring and assessing their own levels is the only way of coping with a dynamic map. There will be no global sheriff of the soil carbon of the world. It has to be country by country, producing, generating the data and providing it in a way that we can interpret globally. We can understand and compare. But the solution is local. The solution is national. That's the only way that, and this is the way we are generating the global soil organic carbon map that will be released on 5 December that you mentioned to us. I think we did a very big round here, and we have to bring this to the farmer's perspective. And Terran Giacomini from the National Farmers Union of Canada, a member of Via Campesina, has been listening carefully. And what would be the take-home message for the National Farmers Association Union and for yourself?
So first of all, thank you. I appreciate being included in this panel. I think I'm going to frame some points that I've made after listening to all of you based on some of the work we've been doing in the Via Campesina around climate change. And I think the main conclusion is really that I think what we're seeing is sort of two different perspectives on both the problem that we're facing with climate change and the solutions, how to approach the climate crisis. And from the perspective of La Via Campesina, the climate change is a systemic crisis. It's a problem of politics and economics, this fundamentally a systemic problem that cannot be solved just with technical fixes or new technology. And we see the solution as rooted in agroecology and food sovereignty, which means more power for grassroots organizations of farmers, indigenous peoples, peasants, and fisher folk around the world to have real input into the direction of the decision making that we take on climate change. So from this perspective, I think we see two concerns with the approach in the Paris Agreement with respect to what's called the principle of compensation. And we think that this approach is flawed because it views soil as a means to offset emissions and therefore avoids discussion about how to take real action to reduce emissions at the source, both in agriculture when it comes to phasing out fertilizers and pesticides or unnecessary emissions in agriculture, and in energy when it comes to actually keeping fossil fuels in the ground. We ask that the negotiators not view farmers as plumbers, drawing down carbon that is emitted by the world's biggest corporations, including Exxon and Bayer, Monsanto, who are most responsible for the excess emissions in the atmosphere, but rather to view farmers as primarily as food producers, people who care for the land and love the land, and primarily do not view soil as a carbon sink, but as like a child. They view the land as they love the land, we love the land. So it's not just a carbon stock, that's not what we're talking about. That's not the perspective, right? I think the Via Campesina members are very critical of programs including the Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture, which in the absence of clear criteria does a balancing act between promoting agroecology and promoting the use of expensive and polluting genetically modified seeds and their herbicides like glyphosate, as well as other technology fixes to address what we know is a systemic problem. 60% of the members of the Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture are in fact fertilizer and pesticide companies. This concept of climate smart agriculture we see as an empty shell that agribusiness, industrialists, and biotechnology companies hide behind while continuing to pump dangerous emissions into the atmosphere. So that's the first point related to compensation versus cutting emissions at the source. Okay. So the next concern has to do with the inclusion of soil carbon in carbon markets, which I think was raised earlier. So from the perspective of small-scale farmers, I think there's a real danger with soil carbon sequestration in increasing the pressure on land and increasing financialization of nature. By putting a market value on soil carbon through compensation as a tool to combat climate change, you increase the pressure on the land. And the small-scale farmers who are already victims of climate change are doubly threatened. If we are to encourage investment in agriculture to sequester more carbon, especially from private sources, which with much greater expanses of land will be needed with an increased risk of land grabbing, which is already a major problem, especially in Africa. The danger will be multiplied by the race for land with paired mechanisms like REDD+ linked to carbon finance. So we see this as a false or a business as usual solution that's not really a solution, but just a way to make money from climate change.
Terran, we are seriously encroaching the other session's time, so
okay.
You have to wrap up.
I'll wrap up right now. So the bottom line is we cannot let already highly concentrated corporations use climate change to justify making more profits. And we recommend that strong public policies be developed where, based on food sovereignty, where the soil and the land is in control of peasants and farmers, and where these climate negotiations are not used as a mechanism to promote the financialization of nature and land grabbing.
I think the applause speaks for itself. Would you like any key message on the soils specifically that we have been discussing here? Or
Yeah, okay, thanks for the opportunity to maybe provide one or two sentences. I think that we're coming from a different perspective. Soil is not to be marketized. Soil is a source of life. And that's it.
Thank you so much. I think we have to come up with a round of applause for Teran, but also for the panelists. It has been FAO's objective and the organizers' objective of the Action Days to bring farmers, especially young farmers and representatives of farmer organizations, to come to the sessions, bring the perspective from their point of view. Does it make some people uncomfortable? Yes. Is it a problem? No. It's a solution. We have to look at the perspectives of those that are custodians of the land and the soils and the water resources and produce the food that we need. So we thank you very much for all of you. And I would a big thank you for the interpreters who have been bearing with us tremendously. I thank you everyone for participating in the session. Thank you.